Hey, this is Edwin Dearborn, another edition of Growth Driven. Thanks for joining us. If you're trying to get more done with less with AI, I have an expert here that's going to tell you all about it. Edwin Dearborn here, another edition of Growth Driven. I want to welcome my guest, Lomit Patel. Thank you for joining us.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Edwin.
Yeah, we connected on LinkedIn, and I saw your profile. Quite a bit of accomplishment. I was very impressed. If you want to know more about Lomit, I have the leanai.com, or just find his profile on LinkedIn. So, when I saw that you were working with AI, I've got this kind of like version in my head that it's only for Facebook and Twitter for tracking our actions. But what I see you're using it for startups to actually help become more lean, get more done with less. And I'd like you to speak, before we get into that, how'd you get into AI?
So I got into AI. To be honest, AI has been around for a while, right? But it's definitely become more mainstream now. But generally, like working in startups, one of the biggest challenges any startup has is trying to figure out how can you grow as quickly as possible and be as resourceful as possible as you grow. And the idea is to try and get more done with less. And so generally in that realm, a lot of the things that you try to do at a startup is sort of identify processes that you could potentially automate as much as possible. So then there's less dependency on needing to hire more people to try and do those potential tasks and processes. And my area of expertise has been around helping startups to grow as a business. So generally the focus is all on the realm of once you have a product or service. I usually join startups usually pretty early once they have a product or service. And then the big challenge is how do you acquire customers? How do you generate revenue and identify the right business model that will potentially take a business from having a couple of hundred like beta customers to really potentially becoming a huge multi-million or $1 billion valued business. And the big word in startups is always around exit, right? They're always looking for some outcome. And so the general outcomes are either, where you can sort of grow and become interesting, where a company could potentially acquire you, or you could potentially, grow where you can go and become and do an IPO. So.
Right. So either exit through acquisition by another company or through IPO. Okay. So now, because I'm kind of a marketing guy, tell me how AI can be used for a startup in terms of the client acquisition play.
Yeah, and you and I both sort of come from the marketing bent, and I think people don't realize that marketing is so important in any business, right? Because you could have a great product and service, but if nobody knows about it, it's not going to go far. So, the way we leverage AI in use cases related to marketing, primarily it's around, how do you advertise effectively? Because most of the companies, whether you're a startup or not, are really spending a lot of money on digital marketing now. That's sort of become the place where people are going to either find new customers or to find potential customers. And so where AI can really help is because everybody has a certain amount of budget that they're spending on advertising. And the idea is how can you spend that money as efficiently as possible? And generally, the way you can define efficiency is either for every dollar that you spend, can you at least recoup back $1, and how quickly can you do that so that at least you're not losing any money on what you're spending on advertising. But ideally, you're able to spend $1 and bring back $3 or more. So the idea is you're making more money than what you're spending, and that's called return on ad spend. So so whether it's return on ad spend or you're spending money to try and acquire new customers, where AI comes in is right. Everybody mostly are either spending money on Google or Facebook, but generally Google and Facebook have their own AI system, and the big difference is their AI system is self-serving because it's really built for you to spend more money with them.
Of course.
It isn't really built to really help you spend your money as efficiently as possible. And so that was kind of the problem that I was thinking about 4 years ago when I joined IMVU, which is a huge gaming company. And the idea was, how can we potentially become more efficient about how we're spending our money, not only on Google and Facebook, but we spend millions a month across a number of different partners. And the idea was we should try to create our own version of AI that sort of sits between us and these different partners. And so what we want to try to do, instead of giving these different partners fixed budgets, like, hey, we'll spend, $1 million on Facebook, $1 million on Google, and we would let the AI sort of figure out for us in real time based on the outcomes that we want to optimize towards, which is either return on ad spend or cost to acquire a customer, and let the machine decide whether Google should be getting more of our budget at any given time, in any given day, in any given week, or in any given month, versus Facebook or any other partners that we're spending. And the big difference is what people don't realize when it comes to digital marketing. It's kind of like the stock market. It's all supply and demand at the end of the day. What drives prices up is like how much do people really want to pay for that specific ad placement or that user on Facebook or Google. And so having a machine, our machine, the AI can look at your data and identify who's the best type of user that's most likely to spend the most amount of money on your product or service. And then it takes that profile of a user and looks across, instead of just giving it to Google and Facebook and depending on them, it looks across this whole preview of billions of users across different magnitudes of partners, and in real time is able to identify targeting this user on Google at this given time is more efficient than targeting this user on Facebook. And so, the machine is able to make these these buying decisions for us. And as a consequence, it's able to make these decisions based on data it's seen in real time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so, that way, there's no like dependency on a person needing to go and push any button, because the AI is pretty much pushing all these buttons for us.
It doesn't have babies. It doesn't take a day off. It doesn't get sick, and it thinks more intelligently. What I found really fascinating, Lomit, and thank you for all that data. That's very, very intriguing. Is I like the idea that I think the entrance point for most people is the AI models of Google and Facebook is built to make them profits, not necessarily make you profits.
That's right.
Versus I come in and I'm looking at it from your profits. That's the paradigm shift right there. Number two, I'm looking outside the Facebook and Google universe and going, wow, they're the big players, but there's other players and there's other methodologies, and I'll get you in front of those people too.
Yeah, and then the third thing that I would add to that is the huge paradigm shift is once you sort of look at a bigger preview into where you could be spending that money, it gets all the different partners to start competing for your budget instead of getting these fixed allocations of budgets that generally most people do nowadays. And as a consequence of that, you're able to take data of what's working in certain partners and apply it across other partners. So the more data and the more users you
I see. Yeah. Yeah.
You're pretty much creating your own like
Ecosystem.
virtuous cycle, because you're taking data from everyone, you're
Yeah.
using that to apply to identify who's the right user. And then there's another word, that's obviously gained a lot of popularity, called personalization.
Yeah.
And obviously companies like Amazon have mastered this
Yes.
for a long time, but they've invested a lot of money into doing that. But what people don't realize is you could actually create your own version of personalization by this virtuous cycle of AI, because then you're getting all of this data. You're able to identify who's the right user, but you can also identify what's the right message. Because in marketing, it's not only targeting the right user, but you got to identify what's the right message that's going to resonate with someone at any given time. And so you're able to test. So give you an example. Before AI, we used to do a lot of these things manually with people, and we would run maybe a couple of hundred experiments a month. And since we've applied everything into AI and automation, we're able to increase our velocity of running experiments and testing to about 5 to 10,000 different experiments a month. And so that's the huge sea shift. Is imagine how much you can learn if you're running 5 to 10,000 experiments with running a couple of hundred, right?
Yeah, you've 100x'd your quantum leap.
Yeah.
Okay, so now when somebody comes to you and they go, "Wow, I saw Lomit on Edwin's show," how does someone get your services, and then what do you do? Like, what do you are you an ad agency, and we'll run your ads and we'll figure this all out for you?
So, I mean, right now, what I do is that, I work, I help a number of companies as an advisor. So I pretty much, I'm able to kind of look at exactly where they are right now, and more importantly, identify where they're looking to go, and then to figure out, does AI make a lot of sense for them at this stage, or do they need to potentially find some, efficiencies on getting to a certain level before AI can kick in. Because the big thing with AI is, before you make that type of investment, you need to be getting a certain level of data that you can aggregate, because AI is all dependent on data. And if you, for example, if you're not getting enough like new customers, or you're not spending enough, or at a certain budget or threshold, then it's like it doesn't make a lot of sense. For example, if I'm driving a car, but the maximum speed is only like 40 miles per hour, there's no point in me buying a Ferrari, because I won't be able to use it.
Might as well just have a Kia. So typically, what is kind of the threshold of ad spend where it starts to make sense to bring you, like someone like yourself, on board?
Yeah. So generally, companies, I would say you probably want to be spending in the realm of around $30,000 to $50,000 a month. And once you're spending that, that's the level where you'll be getting enough data signals coming in where an AI system can make a lot of sense. But more importantly, when you're spending that level of money, any small efficiencies and improvements you make could have a magnitude impact.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. So now that's on the client acquisition front. Do you help people with AI with organizational process, or even manufacturing, helping manufacturers dial in their product, like whether it's a machine or an engine?
Yeah. So generally, what I try to do when I advise startups is obviously look at existing processes, but generally what I found is that the big dilemma is always around building something like this or buying it. And what I find is, for the most part, it always makes sense to try and buy versus build something like this. But the idea is to identify what are the use cases you're going to use it for. And to use the example of marketing, most people are going to use it for getting more efficient, better, smarter, and faster on acquiring customers, how to retain or engage those users, and how to monetize. And all three of those use cases, you could literally be able to satisfy over 90% of achieving that by just putting a couple of different systems together that already exist out there, and that's what I can sort of advise companies on. The idea is don't invest your own resources into this for the most part, because this technology continues to change so rapidly, and the cost to maintain it is pretty high. So it's better to sort of work with a couple of systems where that's kind of their vested interest is to stay on top of that, and just have the right integrations put in place from your business. So you're feeding the right data into it, you're feeding the right creatives, and you're setting up the right experiments. And once you set that up, it becomes like a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of where the learning just continues to get better over time. And for the most part, what you can do once you have that in place is equivalent to like hiring like 30 to 50 or 100 people, and still there's less risk in doing that, because you're not dependent on any one person who for example happens to leave your company or whatever. Then the question is like, you've lost that.
Yeah. You're like, but you were supposed to do the bulk. AI could do it for you.
Yeah.
So give me a couple of examples, like, the before, the during, and the after. Like, you come in and things are spending a lot of money or inefficient. Give us a insight of what it's like to work with you on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just use the company where I'm working right now at IMVU. Yeah, I mean, before I joined IMVU, we were spending, I would say in the realm of around less than like a couple of $100,000 a month, and the challenge was, for the most part, a lot of things were kind of manual. So we hired more people, more agencies to try and manage a lot of these things for us, and the challenge with that is, a big part of our spend was happening on mobile. We're starting to go into mobile, and the user attention on mobile is pretty small. It's like if you don't capture their attention pretty quickly, you're going to lose those users. And so the efficiency wasn't that great in terms of how we were spending. And that's when we kind of took a step back and wanted to figure out how could we leverage technology to solve this problem for us. And that's when we started coming up with the different use cases. So one use case was, how can we acquire users more efficiently? And that was really around, identifying what are the right channels we want to be investing our money into to acquire users. What's the right type of creatives we want to be targeting users with? And what are the right times of the day or the week or the month that we want to be able to like scale up or scale down? And for the most part, trying to do a lot of those things through human execution was going to be very challenging. And so to solve for that, we had a lot of user data, and that's where we sort of applied some of the simple like AI models. And just to give people a quick example with AI, there's two types of models you can literally build. One is like structured learning, where the machine can kind of look at patterns in terms of like, hey, I want to get to this outcome, which is how to acquire new customers more efficiently. And what are the levers you can pull? Like you can increase your bids, you can change your creatives, and you can target different users in different channels. And so what happens between that and this is everything in the middle, where either you're trying to optimize dials up and down and make changes, and that's where we sort of had the machine sort of observe like what's going on in the middle here that's really leading to our best users. And once the machine's able to recognize patterns of like what happens when you increase bids in these channels at these times, it's able to come up with predictions on like, if this worked this time, what's the percentage that this is going to work again and again, and then using those predictions across different channels. And that's primarily the first use case that we did. And we found pretty quickly that we were able to take, where we were spending a couple of $100,000 to a couple of $1 million, over time, and still be able to like hit our objectives, which was to acquire customers as efficiently as possible, and more importantly, how long would it take us to recoup that money back? And for the most part, we're able to recoup that money back within 30 days.
Wow.
And so when you think about that,
the advertising pays for itself.
Exactly. So you end up funding your own growth. You don't have
Wow.
to raise more money, and that in itself was huge. But then the other part of that is you don't want to just bring like customers or users in. You want to try to increase how much lifetime value, which is how much time or money you can get out of them. And that's when we started looking at creating different user journeys within the product, in terms of like, what are the behaviors and actions that users are taking when they come into, for example, our game, that really leads them to spending the most amount of money? And we're letting the machine sort of model that behavior, and then it came back with predictions that a user has to take action A, B, C, D, and E. And if they take all 5 of those actions within the first 7 days, that leads to our greatest customer. And so then once we had that insight from the machine, then we'll let the machine sort of, helped us sort of identify an onboarding process within the product where we would try to influence users to go down a similar journey.
Yeah. That's crazy. That's crazy. I love that. So if a company is spending $50,000 a month on ads, and they're like, "Hey, Lomit, I really I've heard about this AI. I'm on board." Boy, if whether it's getting new patients for a hospital or new gamers onto a game, they can come to you and then you'll go, "Yeah, I'll put this system in. You don't have to build it. You'll tap into our stuff and we'll just let go and start to give you those pathways." Is that correct?
Yeah, like I can help advise them into really identifying based on where they are and where they want to go, what would be the right platforms and systems that they would need to kind of get to that. Because for the most part, my general philosophy is to try and leverage other platforms that have already built the system to try and get you to where you want to go, versus trying to invest your own time and resources into this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just another source of efficiency. Speaking of marketing, and I'm just talking about platforms now, other than Google and Facebook, what are you finding that are other channels that are good client acquisition that you're tapping into?
Yeah, again, it depends on the type of users that you want to go after. But what I will say is, one thing that's come out of the pandemic is that there's a huge sea shift on how much budget is now gone into digital and online marketing versus offline marketing.
Okay.
So and so when it comes to online marketing, outside of like Google and Facebook, which are obviously the 2 big potential partners, there's a lot of other partners out there depending on the type of audiences you want to go after. For example, other social networks, there's Snapchat if you want to go after younger users. There's TikTok as well. There's LinkedIn as well, depending on if you want to go after a more of a B2B audience. And then outside of that, you've got things like Apple Search, especially on mobile. And then you get these other partners which are known as like ad networks or DSPs, which are demand side platforms, where what they've tried to do is potentially be able to get into a lot of these smaller mobile apps that are out there. If you want to try to target a certain user, you can kind of go through them to try and help you get to a number of other potential apps that you wouldn't necessarily be able to reach within Google and Facebook, because Google and Facebook kind of have their own closed system in terms of all the users within their ecosystem.
Interesting. Have you what are some other? Have you worked in healthcare, automotive? Like, give me some of the if somebody's listening to this, what are some of the top 5 or top 10 industries or niches that you attract?
So I've worked in for the most part, I've worked on it's all been on the consumer side. So it's been in consumer verticals. I've been fortunate that I've worked with a number of different startups, but in terms of the verticals, you know, I can drop some names like one company I worked for was TrustedID, which was all around identity theft protection, which ended up getting acquired by Equifax, but it's all around finance, about helping people to better manage their financial information so you don't get become a victim of identity theft. Another company that I worked for was called Texture, which is pretty much a news app. It was a joint venture between all of the big publishing companies like Meredith, Hearst, Time, and a few others, where you pretty much get all those premium magazines that you see on news shelves within an app. So it was unlimited access to reading magazines. That ended up actually getting acquired by Apple, so it became part of the Apple News Premium service, which is out there. If people subscribe to Apple, all of those magazines came from that acquisition. Another company I think most people might have heard of is called Roku, that I worked for. And Roku obviously has become huge on streaming, But one of the things I was going to mention would, from my experience at Roku, and you talked about some new channels, streaming is actually another channel that a lot of people haven't paid attention to. But now, one of the things that came out of the pandemic is a lot of people spend time in entertainment apps, gaming apps, for example. People don't realize, but there's a lot of people across all broad spectrums. It's not just young people spending time in gaming apps. There's there's parents. There's a whole slew of people that are spending time in gaming because it's a way to kill time. And the same thing goes with streaming too. There's a lot of people now that are spending time on streaming from like Netflix, Hulu, and all these other places. And so that's another opportunity to look into like connected or over the top TV as a potential channel for advertising. That's something that we've been doing here at IMVU, and it's becoming very interesting for us to acquire users outside of just people that own traditional apps. And that's another opportunity there. And then with IMVU, it's where I'm working right now. It's a gaming app. And again, it's more than gaming because it's a virtual reality social network. So people create avatars and they create these virtual worlds and they're connecting with users all around the world. So there's a lot of things. I would say there's a word for this now. It's called the metaverse. So people are trying to sort of escape from the reality into an alternate reality. And creating an alternate reality world. So that's another hot trend that's really been picking up a lot of steam right now.
Very, very interesting. Okay, so I have a hypothesis or a postulate of what could be with a company. So I work with a healthcare company that's also coming out with a consumer product that's going to be like you can go home and you can rehab on a bike. It's meant for older people.
Yeah,
kind of like a Peloton kind of thing, right? But I don't have to run because I'm overweight or older or whatever. If I was going to release that and I was going to do an ad budget, this AI technology would be able to help us identify, okay, these are the right people, these are the right times, here's the right creatives, this is the path that we're finding. And over time, it would start to narrow down the more successful ways to acquire clients. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the other thing it will be able to help you identify is even within the clients that you end up acquiring or look into your database of users that are using your product or service right now, we'll be able to kind of look within that and come up with a potential scoring system like, hey, these people are super highly engaged or high used, or like the highest valued users. These are medium and these are kind of low. So it can create even more potential user segments and potential audiences, which the benefit of having like a good, better, best user segment is then you can price how much they're worth to you differently. And then the AI can target them at different price points across the digital.
That's crazy. It's like there's all the selection, like this is the creative, this is the budget, this is the person, this is the time, this is the channel.
Yeah, and think about it. The way to think of the channels, like, in terms of advertising, everything primarily that's digital, including streaming TV now, it's kind of like the stock market. Everybody has access to it, but the question is, how much are you willing to pay for that stock at any given time?
And not only just buy the stock, but manage the stock and know when to keep, when to hold them and when to sell them, right?
That's right. So
it's not only just acquiring the stock, it's also managing the stock.
That's right. Yeah. And the system, because it's like automated for the most part, is doing a lot of that, the menial and the heavy lifting that for the most part, that's where a lot of human error can happen too, because just kind of going through those numbers and processes, that's where generally, because it can be boring and tedious looking at all of that data. That's where mistakes happen. I'll give you one other quick example, because you mentioned healthcare.
Yeah,
and this is something that we can all relate to, because of what's been going on with the pandemic. The amazing thing is just how quickly they were able to come up with these vaccinations potentially. None of that would have happened without AI in the background. If you study how they got to that, because generally the average time to release a new vaccination cure is 5 to 7 years, because it goes through a number of trials and tests. And the way that they were able to accelerate a lot of that was because they were able to apply AI into using the machines to evaluate a lot of the tests and the results from the people that were beta testing a lot of these vaccinations, and that's why they were able to come back with a pretty high confidence in terms of, like, is this vaccination going to be able to protect you like 80% of the time, or 90%, or 60%, or whatever. But none of that would have been possible without having AI in the mix.
But you could also use that. We talked about personalization earlier.
Yeah.
You could also, let's say that machine was telemedicine.
Yeah.
You could also use AI to go, hey, this routine is the best for you to rehabilitate or become fit with, because we've been watching how many calories you lose or how well you've been pedaling or running on Peloton, let's say.
Yeah.
And we know that if you run at 4:30 in the afternoon for 30 minutes at this pace, you'll get the most caloric deficit benefit during that time. I mean, potentially you could do that, right, at a personalization level?
It can. Another example is Amazon, or if you watch Netflix, or if you listen to music on Spotify. Exactly what you said is, they're literally just looking at not just what you're doing on their product service, but what millions of other people are doing.
Yeah.
And then trying to come up with recommendations and personalization that based on, somebody, like Edwin, like who are other users that sort of fit a similar profile in terms of age and behavior in the product. And that's how they come up with these recommendations, like, hey, based on your usage,
10 movie searches. Here's some more history movies. That's awesome. Wow. I tell you, I've really, I thought I knew what AI was, and I'm a very well-read person, but you've really given me a much deeper and richer understanding of how dynamic this universe really is. And what's exciting and scary at the same time is how fast this AI is going to take over how we live.
Yeah, what I would add is that there's definitely a lot of misconceptions around AI as well, because especially around fear and taking over. Yeah, one thing that I do want to put out there is ultimately the thing that we all need to remember is that it was human intelligence that created artificial intelligence, not the other way around.
True.
And so, it's like, we should never think of like that we're going to be at the mercy of the machines. Because if you think about it, I mean, even throughout history, there's been phases that have happened through the Industrial Revolution and other revolutions where the idea is to try and make, life easier or better for people, right? And generally, artificial intelligence is just another tool to do that, where it's just helping you to either figure out how to save time or save money, right, in your life. But the key part of it is that, with it, the big challenge with any companies is you still need to have people to be able to take the leadership roles to try and try and champion these things within organizations. And that, I feel, is the reason why it's so important to continue to stay on top of what's happening with AI, because ultimately when you look back in history, you want to be on a role of being someone that helped sort of enable to bring this into a business versus one that sort of stood in the way to try and resist it. Because ultimately, as we see with history, new things always end up, replacing the old. And if you're on the wrong side of that equation, then that's the reason why your job might be at risk of being replaced.
Yeah, or you're broke. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, the reason why I ask these questions and I have guests on like this is because I want to learn about it. I want to expose people. I want to bring people, thought leaders like yourself, that are doing exciting things and go, hey, check this out. This is where we should be going as a company, as a humanity. If we can serve better people with better medicines and better solutions and make things easier. I mean, that's I think what the whole human endeavor experience is about, is how do we help each other?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's all about value creation, right? You got to provide value, because if you're not providing value, then no one's going to adopt whatever you have to provide, right?
Absolutely. Now, you have a book, is that correct? If they go to the leanai.com?
Yeah, my book, it's called Lean AI, and it's actually part of the, it was published by O'Reilly. So it's part of the Lean Startup series, which is
nice.
a series of different books from, on how startups can be, better and smarter around the whole principle of lean, of trying to get more done with less. And so, it's, you can check out the website. It's called theleanai.com. Yep. I also encourage you to go to Amazon, because there's a lot more information about it on Amazon, because it was one of the best-selling books on Amazon.
That's awesome. Well done. Congratulations.
And I was going to say, I write a lot around this topic, and I'm always publishing on my blog. And so if anybody's interested and you just want to learn about, what's the latest and greatest, or what's going on with AI, just go to my website, which is pretty much my name, lomitpatel.com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn too, so I'm always putting content out. So if anybody wants to follow me on LinkedIn, or connect with me, I'm happy to connect with them and share, any advice, any way I can help people. I'm happy to do that.
That's awesome of you. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, connect with Lomit on LinkedIn, as I did. That's how we connected. And I think if you're a big brand or you're a startup that's looking to take AI, and which is why I interviewed you, because I represent this big company, and I'm going to be having some conversations with some people afterwards about this. But I think this is a very exciting field. I'm glad that you've gravitated to it. You're writing about it. You're blogging about it. You're educating people about it. So definitely connect with Lomit Patel on this. Go to his website. It's his name.com, or go to LinkedIn, or just go to the Lean AI. Either way, if you put his name in Google, I'm sure you'll end up finding him, because I'm sure he's using AI to get people to find out more about his book and everything else. So, Lomit, thank you so much for joining us. You've added so much value to the show. I can't wait to share this with people, and wish you continued success in all your endeavors.
Thanks for having me, Edwin. It was a pleasure to be here.
All right. This has been another edition of Growth Driven. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. We do this because we want to give you value. I try to bring on authors and experts and just geniuses about business and marketing and all this other stuff. and take advantage of it and make your life a better one. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.